Hello, yes, I'm back again. Let's go, let's do this. We're on a bit of a roll. These scripts are really coming in handy now. So, we're back again, and this time we are talking about the Hetzer. Oh, yes, Hetzer's gonna Hetz. So, the Hetzer tank destroyer is one of the last tank hunters built by the Germans during the Second World War. It's built as another one of these machines developed on an outdated or obsolete tank chassis. In this case, that would be the Panzer 38T. This vehicle has continued to see service even after the war, however, and it has built up this legendary reputation within the tanking community. Obviously, the Hetzer's gonna Hetz one. That comes from another very famous YouTuber of the tanking community. Um, it's just this fun little box. Let's be honest here. So, development of the Panzer 38T actually begins following the discovery of another armoured vehicle, the Romanian Marazal project. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that. So the Marazal project was a Romanian light tank destroyer with a fully enclosed fighting compartment, low profile and a long barrel 75mm gun, all ideal for ambushing enemy armour. The Germans had next to no idea that this vehicle existed until November of 1943, when the Romanians ordered several key components from Germany and German northern occupied France. And the Germans ultimately discovered the project and were most impressed by the design and the brand usage. That they have no idea this thing exists. And then all of a sudden, bang, oh my god, this thing is brilliant. The details of the machines become available to the Germans by December of 1943. The same month, the Romanians actually approve the material for construction. Hitler orders himself a development of this vehicle, or a German version based on the Panzer 38T. On the 6th of January 1944, Hitler is shown the design for the Material M04 prototype, most of whose features include the armament and the armour. The Hetzer would copy pretty much all of these features and use it in some capacity in its own way. By May of 1944, parts of the German arms industry were admitting that they had copied the Romanian design. Whilst the Hetzer may have copied Romanian designs, the idea of a self-propelled anti-tank gun is by this point nothing new within the German army. You know, the Stuka has been around for a while. They've made the Jagdpanzers, the Jagdpanther is beginning to come into service. And they've laid down the prototype for what will eventually become the monstrous Jagdtiger. This is not exactly a new concept to Germany by this point. And if they have to copy the Romanians, so be it. It was decided to once again use the ever-reliable Panzer 38T chassis. By late 1943 and early 1944, the number of chassis available is growing. The Skoda plan is one of the few in the entire Reich that isn't being religiously punished by Allied bombings because it's placed at a distance in which the Allies can't get very often. As a result, the Panzer 38T chassis is still available en masse. The Germans ordered that the chassis be widened and lengthened, which allowed for the newly built hull to be fitted on perfectly. The chassis also received a new road wheel type that had been planned for a prototype Panzer 38 Recon tank, as well as also receiving an updated Praga AC-2 6-cylinder petrol engine to help give it more power with the increased weight. The vehicle would also make use of a Praga Wilson gearbox, giving it 5 gears going forward and 1 gear going backward. So almost immediately, development of this machine just goes off like a rocket, because they can just take what they've already got, they can custom build this hull, and bang, we're in and we're going very, very quickly. The Hetzer is to be armed with the 7.5cm Pak 39 L48 gun, with a maximum capacity of 41 rounds of ammunition. This is a cheap, mechanically reliable and relatively effective weapon even by 1944 standards. This is what is being used on a couple of other tank destroyers. The German army is still using these things on their tanks. It's a good damn weapon, it can't be argued with. This is backed up by a single MG34 which is mounted on the roof of the fighting compartment with a total of 1,200 storable rounds. Though, like with all machines in wartime, it was likely that additional ammo was carried in non-sanctioned areas, most likely over the back of the tank. The vehicle's new weight as a result of all the changes was 16 tons, which would prove to almost immediately be a substantial problem. This could not be helped by the armour being a rather hefty 60mm at the front, angled at 60 degrees, which would cause a number of issues for the front suspension. And we've talked about this with things like Jagdpanzers, and the Jagdpanther will also suffer from this problem. You stick too much weight on the front, the thing is going to have naturally problems being front heavy. This is something that they're going to have to eventually solve. So the Jagdpanzer 38T would officially begin production in April of 1944. So this is a turnaround, by the way, of about 5 months. With the idea of it is to replace the Marder 3s using the same hull, and the idea is to basically stop Marder 3 production and then push the Jagdpanzer 38 production. The initial tanks would almost immediately notice a significant problem with this excessive weight that we mentioned earlier. The machines did not sit level with the ground, as a combination of heavy frontal armour, the gun and the transmission, all meaning that the thing was excessively front heavy. This was eventually sorted by strengthening the leaf springs starting in June of the same year, which allowed it to somehow sit upright, but it wasn't really a solution for long term, because eventually the springs are still going to be shot to hell and you're still going to have to deal with that very heavy front constantly pointing the gun into the dirt. Between May and June, additional hatches were added to assist the crew in getting in and out of the vehicle. In August, a number of simplifications were made to help with manufacturing. In September, the leaf springs were increased in thickness, again helping with the weight, and also to stop them from wearing out so quickly. The same month, work was also done on modifying the driver's viewport, which had been discovered was something of a nasty shot trap when being hit. Which meant that when the round struck the area, not only did it not bounce, but had an even higher chance of just doing damage to the vehicle by basically splattering its way and killing the driver. These were only a few minor changes that were made to the vehicle during this time, but trust me when I say that there were many, many more. There was a huge number. The Hetzer was not the most mechanically reliable machine when it first comes into service. It takes a long time to get this thing working. So they are initially assigned to Panzerjäger Abteilungs, which operate within German infantry divisions. At this point, the Germans are trying to replace static anti-tank guns within their armed forces, because their infantry is slowed down by them. Because if you have a towed anti-tank gun, you need to have infantry to man it, you need to have a truck to move it, you need to carry the ammunition separately. You know, there's so much more logistical challenge, whether it's you just Jagdpanzer 38, gun, automatic drive, ammunition on board. Job's good. So between April 1944 and May 1945, the Germans will build about 2,584 machines. Another 249 units are built after the war by the Czech government for training, and an additional 158 vehicles are built for the Swiss army under the name of G13. We'll go into these post-war versions in a bit, but it's just important to note them now for manufacturing reasons. German forces would begin to receive the new vehicles in July of 1944, with the Heeres Panzerjäger Abteilung 731 being the first to receive them. German forces on the ground sent back mostly positive feedback on the vehicles, with many crews complimenting the safety of the all-enclosed design, something which had been lacked on the Marders and the Nashorns. They were also happy to have access to the Pak 39, which as stated was still very, very effective at the time. You know, you can get through Shermans relatively easy with it. T-34s you might have a harder time with, but if we talk about how the Soviets tended to build their tanks, it isn't exactly an issue. The accuracy of the weapon was noted in testing, with reports stating that the Panzergranaten 39 ammunition fired from the gun was at a range of 500 metres, had an accuracy of about 99%, with a gunner again having a 99% chance of hitting the target first time at 500 metres. That's on a trained and experienced gunner, by the way. You don't expect just a newbie to sit inside the thing and go, oh hey, yeah, I'm just going to hit this thing at 500 metres first time. No one's going to do that. The vehicle carried 3 types of ammunition. It carried the Panzergranaten 39, which was an armour-piercing ballistic capped ammunition, the GR-38, which was a high explosive anti-tank projectile, and the Panzergranaten 40, which was an armour-piercing composite rigid ammunition. It is important to note from reports that the heat ammunition was notably less accurate and effective against armoured targets than the standard ammunition, while the APCR was notably scarce to crews in late war Germany. So APCBC is largely what they're operating with. The Jagdpanzer 38 was one of the most common late war tank destroyers in German service due to both its quick production time and relatively high reliability, which were genuinely liked by their crews as a result. It also tended to not burn through so much of the precious fuel, which was critical to Germany in late war. The only crew-related issues were issues of loading the gun, in which the loader would have to expose his head out of the roof of the fighting compartment to get a round loaded. This is one of the issues with having tanks that are so low down. You have to be able to make space for a dude to sit behind the back and then load that round in. As the Jagdpanzer 38 was deployed at a time when Germany was constantly on the defensive, they were often deployed entirely in defensive roles. This had a significant impact upon the vehicle, as it often reduced the impact of their weak side armour and poor gun traversers, as they were less vulnerable to being fired at first. This was especially true for ambush situations where the tanks could determine the engagement range and how the attack would be conducted. One example of when such an action worked to great effect was during an action on the Eastern Front, in which a company of Jagdpanzers destroyed 20 enemy vehicles in exchange for no losses of their own. This is, of course, a Jagdpanzer situation, but we can apply that in the same context to the Hetzer, and it will, you can sort of see the same result coming up. One of the main reasons for their successes as an ambush hunter was their small dimensions. With a height of just 2.17 metres, or just over 7 foot, and a width of 2.63 metres, 8 feet and 8 inches, roughly the same size as a pre-war Panzer II, this made finding them nearly impossible from a distance, as most enemy crews were used to looking for big, tall and wide machines, and not these tiny little tank hunters. As one might expect from Germany during wartime, there was no end to developments for the Jagdpanzer 38s, and I'm going to go through just a couple of them now. I'd also like to apologise for any mispronunciations I get with these. We have the Behelfswagen 38, which was a command variant which was fitted with a far more powerful radio set. We have the Flammenpanzer 38, which was a number of vehicles modified to use the Kobe flamethrower in place of the main gun. These were deployed in the Battle of the Bulge, with 20 being assigned to the 352nd and 353rd Panzer Flame companies attached as part of Army Group G. Less than 50 of these vehicles would be produced, and they didn't have the most successful of adventures. There was the Panzerjäger 38T mit 75mm L70, which was a prototype version which used the L70 gun from the Panther. 3 prototypes were built, but you can imagine, like, if we'd mentioned all the issues with weight beforehand, this just made it even worse. Vehicles were stupidly front heavy, only 3 prototypes were built. A proposal was put forward by Krupp to modify the Jagdpanzer 38 with a superstructure to the rear to mount the gun, but this never amounted to anything. The Panzer 38 Star, a simplified version of the Panzer 38, which attached the 75cm Pak 39 gun to the chassis, fitted with a Tara diesel engine. 10 were built, 9 were converted back to normal Jagdpanzer 38Ts, and the remaining prototype was destroyed at the end of the war. You can just tell how unreliable the Tara engine was. It was not a very nice weapon at all. The Panzerjäger 38T mit 105mm STUH 42-2 L28. Basically the Panzer 38 armed with the 105mm howitzer. Prototype version never saw service at all. A good concept for an assault gun maybe, but with the added weight, why would you want to? The Panzer 38, a light recovery vehicle which was issued alongside Jagdpanzer 38s, with 170 being produced. A prototype was developed to fit the 20cm Flak 38. Some Panthers had this weapon mounted, mostly just for self-defense purposes. The 15cm Schwerstinfanteriegeschütz 33-2 SH auf Jagdpanzer 38T. Sorry for that mouthful. This self-propelled assault gun was developed on the hull of the Panzer 38T recovery vehicle, with a 15cm SIG 33-2 gun mounted in a lightly armoured casemate. The vehicle's enclosed firing compartment was protected by only 10mm of armoured plate on the front and the flanks. It was developed by BMM in Prague and intended as a replacement for things like the grille, which was suffering from attritional battles. Some sources indicate a high probability that the gun was produced at the Alket plant in Berlin-Marefeld. 30 were built between December 1944 and February 1945. I couldn't find any sources of them being used, but knowing late war Germany, they inevitably were. The Wolkenketten Aufklärer 38. This is a reconnaissance vehicle based upon the Bergpanzer 38. Several prototypes were tested, mounting a single or twin 2cm flak 38 and in one case a 75mm L24 gun. Again, this is one of those things that Germany just does late war. It goes, oh, I know, let's develop this random thing. Why? I don't know, let's just develop it anyway. Because they just couldn't stop themselves. The Vulkankaufer 38 Kraxen, which is a fully tracked reconnaissance vehicle based on the Jagdpanzer 38. Again, prototypes were built by BMM and ordered into production, but were never built. The prototypes were believed to have been destroyed before the end of the war. The Flakpanzer 38 Kugelblitz. This was a proposal to mount the turret from the Kugelblitz from the Flakpanzer 4 onto the Jagdpanzer 38 chassis. Nothing was done. The Jagdpanzer 38T with a Panzer 4 turret. A Krupp proposal to mount the turret of a Panzer 4 with the 75cm KWK-40 or the 8cm PAW600 gun on the chassis of a Panzerjäger 38T. Not pursued in any way, shape or form. Then the last one is the Jagdpanzer 38D. This is a larger proposal of the Panzerjäger 38, which is designed to basically mount bigger guns, more armour, but it was only ever a prototype. Mass production was planned, but it never ever came to anything because of the end of the war. And this is like the stupid thing about Germany's like war production design. It's like, oh, we don't really have the time to be developing all these things. We just need as many tanks as we can into production. Meanwhile, every single German designer, I've built this thing that can mount a flippin' stupid gun and we think might be able to win us the war. We don't have time. Stop doing it. The German army would continue to use the Jagdpanzer 38T right up until the end of the war in Europe. Its story, however, doesn't end here. As a result of the end of the war in Europe, many formerly occupied nations set about rebuilding themselves and their armed forces as quickly as they possibly could. The Czech Republic is a good example of this. Prior to its takeover by the Soviets in 1948, it tried desperately to get itself back into some sort of fighting condition. During the period before 1948, the Skoda works still largely were operational. They hadn't been destroyed by much heavy fighting, and they were still able to produce some tanks, and there were plenty of hulls lying around after the Germans left. And so following the end of the war, the Czechs simply continued production. They took what the Germans had left and they mounted them onto 38T chassis, and the designs were designated STI and the ST3. So that's meant to be ST1 and ST3. The latter of which was built for training purposes. These vehicles would be used by the Czech government even after the pro-Soviet takeover of 1948, and Skoda would continue making both vehicles and spare parts for them. The tanks would see use well into the 60s, and they were only replaced eventually by the growing numbers of T-54s and T-55 tanks that were making their way into the Czech Republic, as well as the fact that the Czechs had also begun to domestically produce these vehicles. The Swiss government themselves took great interest in the ST1 and would order over 158 vehicles from the Skoda works. This was done because in the 1950s, as a result of the Korean War, the Swiss government couldn't physically get their hands on anything even semi-modern. Tanks were being sent to Korea, mostly things like the Sherman Easy-8s, which is what everybody wanted if you were a European country in the 1940s. Post-war, it was just like, oh, the Americans have all these Shermans lying around. We'll buy 200 from you. But because the Americans were using all theirs in Korea, they couldn't get hold of any. So the Swiss, as a result, would eventually purchase ST1s from the Czech government, and they would remain in service with the Swiss until the 1970s, when they were finally replaced in their combat role by the Panzer 61, which was Switzerland's first ever successful domestic tank design. This is something to actually note about the Swiss, and I might do a video on it eventually. The Swiss are very, very good at developing their own domestic tanks. Every tank that they've developed domestically is very, very good, but they just haven't done it up until the 70s. That's their first attempt. So beside these two, multiple other nations would use the Panzer 38T in some form or another. The Hungarian army, the Royal Hungarian Army, possessed 75 machines during the war, and then after the Hungarian army was thrown out and the communist government came in, they were still using them. The Romanians captured 2 in the aftermath of King Michael's coup of 1944, which was used against the Germans until confiscated by the Soviets after the war. There had been plans by the Germans to send 15 vehicles to support the Romanian war effort prior to the coup, and even allowed Romanians to produce the vehicle on licence, but these never came to pass. The Polish Home Army would capture some of them during the uprising of 1944. They would capture 2. One we don't know about. The other one we do know about is the Chwat, or Devil, which would see action against German forces. Its fate is unknown, but it's likely that to be similar of the 2 Panthers which were captured by the Poles, in which it was most likely abandoned or just destroyed. Today there are a number of surviving Hetzers around the world. However, there is going to be some disappointment. They are G13 models, retired from Swiss service and given to various museums. There is not a single surviving World War II counterpart. Most if not all of them, were scrapped. Some have ended up on Bulgaria's border with the Turks, because they thought it would be a great idea to try and use them to stop the Turks in case they ever invaded Bulgaria for whatever reason. So the number of vehicles that are in museums, they are for the most part G13 models, because they basically are the exact same design with very little difference, and they're all in very high quality because they were kept in an operational state up until the 70s before being handed over. Before we finish off, it is important to talk about the name Hetzer. Hetzer was at no point the official designation of the vehicle, and at no point. Its origins are believed to be associated with the similar E10 project, and for the time the 2 projects had their names mixed up by the Skoda factory in documentation. It's also known that individuals that use the name Hetzer, I'm talking about the machine in documentation with Heinz Guderian, saying that the name had been coined by troops in the field. The name has subsequently become rather popular through the workings of various military historians. And yes, I will mention his name again. The mighty Jingles is notorious for having coined the term "Hetzer's gonna Hetz." That term has stuck around in the Hetzer community for an awfully long time, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. Okay, so that will do us for the Jagdpanther 38T today. I'd like to thank you guys very much for coming along and watching this today. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps me, and it helps what I'm trying to do. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, go ahead. I try and update regularly, and I try to have lots of community interactions where I can. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic day.